Okay. So this webinar is organized within the Coordinate project. This is the preparatory project to a longitudinal research on children in Europe. At the moment, we are 21 partners from all around Europe preparing this longitudinal study that will approximately start in the year 2027, and it will last for 25 years. The idea is to get longitudinal data about the children, their development, on two cohorts that will start the study on two cohorts that will start simultaneously. The first cohort would be newborn cohort, the second one 8 years old cohort, and to repeat the surveys and other types of research every 2 years for the next 25 years. The survey is designed in the child-centered approach, and this child-centered approach in research with children is the theme of today's webinar. And I'm very pleased to present you today's speakers that will reveal, specific aspects of child-centered research. The first one is Ursula Markowska-Manista from the Faculty of Education, University of Warsaw. The second one is Deidre Horgan, School of Applied Social Studies from University College Cork. And our third speaker is Hardihan Goswami, Department of Sociology, Manchester Metropolitan University. I suggest that we first give space to the speakers. Each of you has approximately 20 minutes of time to present your lecture. I suggest that you share your own PowerPoint presentation because it will be easier for you to go to the next slides. But however, if there will be any problems, we will intervene. And I would like to give the space for the questions at the end of all three presentations. The questions can be put in chat, or you can just raise your hand, and Ksenia will help me with the moderation of all the questions. So to not be too long, I'll just suggest to start with our first presentation. Ursula Markowska-Manista will present the presentation with the title Adultism in Research with Children. So please, Ursula, the floor is yours. You can start to share your presentation.
Thank you very much. Let me just open this PowerPoint. One moment. Do you see the slide number one?
Yes, perfect.
Is it fine? Okay. So first of all, good morning or maybe good afternoon, depend on where we are, or good evening. Thank you very much for the invitation to participate in this important webinar. Important for me because when I saw the topic from insight to impact, so it reminded me about the process. And this is exactly the process. So connected with 2 decades of research work, which came to my mind, and 2 decades of moving from research about to research with, research in which at different stages, influenced by theories, then also co-researchers, adults and children, and practice, and finally in the process, I was able to deconstruct my thinking and redefine participatory and child rights oriented approaches. So I'm very happy that I can present a subject connected with my research and academic interest, and the topic I decided to present is connected with the chapter to your wonderful book, handbook, and I have chosen to talk about today appeals to every adult research who cares out research with children and research involving children. So I decided to start with quotation from Samantha Put article, and the sentence It is somewhat paradoxical that with the new sociology of childhood, many of those who call for the use of innovative or adapted research techniques with children are also those who emphasize the competence of children. If children are competent social actors, why are special child-friendly methods needed to communicate with them? So in principle, it is nothing new, except that we rarely take about the difficulties, the unsuccessful practices, the complications, and about mistakes in research with children. Although the category of research positionality is widely described in the literature, and we are increasingly sharing limitations in research, adultism, which has a variety of causes, remain hidden and sometimes almost absent. So I have prepared this presentation just to explore the context of research with children from the perspective of adults researchers. We usually focus on children's perspective, but just to analyze and pay attention to children's perspectives, first of all, we need to be very reflective with our adults' perspective. So I will address the need to position the child at the center of adults' practice in research involving and research with children. And I will try to refer to visible and invisible challenges encountered in this type of research led by adults research. And as a matrix for my reflections, I will use Janusz Korczak, Children's Rights Approach, with a very interesting, still little explored reference to the individual rights of the child. So let me start with adultism. Adultism is a common form of discrimination against children and adults, characterized by the belief that life experience is strongly linked to age and also to the social status. And it's sometimes still based on the motto that children should be seen and not heard, and focus on protective and at the same time oppressive power. It therefore assumes that an adult, as a person with experience and higher status, is usually wiser, and hence the opinion and the decisions are more important than the perspective of children. This is a classic form of abuse of adult power over and in relation to children, based especially on dependencies engaged in thought and action and the reproduction of established patterns. This abuse is not limited only to the practices of the environmental close to the child on, let's say, micro scale, as this approach by adults is also observed on the macro scale. For example, in practices of subordinated parenting and relationships that do not take into account the rights of the child as a person with inalienable human rights. So children, it's fact, depend on adults' care and adults' protection. So discrimination begins when the possible lack of experience or competence is used to extend their dependency beyond the necessary measure or to limit their freedom and scope of activity, as Manfred Liebel wrote in 2013. Adults does not necessarily happen deliberately. It can be also unintended consequence of protection estimated as necessary. And adultism is indirect or institutional discrimination occurs when certain laws, regulations, social norms appear to be neutral and appeal equally to all persons, but in reality have formal consequences for a person or group of persons, or these consequences are accepted in the process of their implementation. As Liebel underlined in his book, Still little attention is paid to situations in which individuals or social groups, for example, children, experience discrimination or dependency due to their low social or legal status related to their being underage. So adultism is probably the only one form of discrimination that everyone experiences. Much attention is paid to research models with children. I decided just to put on the slide the models of research relating to children's and childhood from Mary Kellett book from 2010, where we can see the construction of adults' way of researching and first of all thinking about research. First on children, then research about children, and research with children, and finally research led by children on matters that concern them. So I will continue and I will focus only on the last two models connected with child-centered approach and also human rights, children's rights. So concerning models, they are very helpful and supportive in the implementation of research with children. We have thousands of them actually connected also with non-governmental organizations and approaches related to activism and let's say action research. I decided just to put only two as examples. This is the basic one from 20th century, the Rogers Hart Ladder of Young People's Participation, which allow us just to understand what exactly means by participation and what is tokenism, decoration, and manipulation concerning such research with children and young people. And the second example, this is the model of participation prepared by Laura Landy and her team concerning 4 puzzles which allow children and adults just to focus on Article 12, the right of the child to express his, her, their views. So space, the voice of the child in such safe space, and the adults, so audience, who are able just to listen to the voices. And then with the voices, they are able to influence the social changes in the local and global areas. So my focus is on preparing adults research for research with children. So the pre-research phase, reflexivity and creating a framework for such research. And this is also the answer to the question why I decided to focus on Janusz Korczak and his approach. So Korczak is related to my life. When I was a child, I first time just met him, not in the book, How to Love a Child or A Child Rights to Respect, but in the Treblinka concentration camp, because house of my grandfather and grandmother is close to this concentration camp. So why Janusz Korczak and his approach? I do so for 3 reasons. Firstly, Korczak is one of the pioneers of children's rights. Secondly, he already demanded that special attention to be paid to the problems of adults 100 years ago, although he did not use the term adultism, but even if he didn't use it, he focused on child-centered approach, and also he tried just to make something like a map, a topography of adults' difficulties related to relations and activities with children. And thirdly, Korczak spent his entire adult life working with children and researching as a doctor, pediatrist. He was a pediatrician and also conducted research in the ghetto during the Second World War and Holocaust, until the children and the orphanage educators were transported to the Treblinka extermination camp. So on this slide, I decided just to put a document from the Korczakianum archive in Warsaw. This is the document from September 1940, the first registration of medical professions records Korczak's answer to questions connected with his academic profession. The exchange goes on this document as follows. The question, do you conduct any academic activity? Yes, answered Korczak. And of what kind? His answer was, I observe, I research children, the child. So as you see, Korczak is deeply connected with child-centered approach. And 100 years ago, he opened up a new perspective on adult-child relationships with its emphasis on subjectivity, individuality, and the equality of children's experience. Korczak emphasized and cultivated respect towards the child as a human being, which became the key child-centered motto in his manifesto, the child's rights to respect. Given that power and also representation are integral to any research with children, I would like to reflect on the issues of adultism in research with and about children. And this matter seems crucial to becoming aware of how children are presented in research discourse, and then how and why we perceive they and our situation, role, and rights in research praxis. So participation and the need to position the child at the center of adult action were addressed and implemented by inter alia Janusz Korczak in his pedagogy of children's rights, and he transferred the results of his observations into his books addressed to adults, asking the ever-present question, is not our attitude to children an expression of adult egocentrism? So Korczak then postulates that children's rights must provide protection, but as well as freedom. So using Korczak's individual rights, prepared and analyzed by Marta Ciesielska, who was the head of Korczakianum Archive, I use this children's rights as individuals' rights as a matrix, and I want to point out how useful these rights are in the search for a child-centered approach in research with children, including children in diverse contexts. So Korczak recognized that no amount of adult knowledge is sufficient to understand the complex world of each child. Hence, in his work, he adopted an attitude of cognitive humility towards the world of the child. He pointed out that the definitions contained in scientific studies are not enough. The child thinks mainly with his, her, they feelings, not with his, her, they intellect. And that is why it is so difficult for researchers to communicate with him, her, they, in a way that is consistent with his, her, they needs and expectations. So therefore, on the basis of this document, Janusz Korczak, children's rights as individual rights, with the individual rights of the child, let us quickly follow up on issues that sometimes escape research with children, or on issues that are absent in research or are overlooked by adults who do not realize the relevance and importance for the implementation of research in which the voice of the child will be considered and influenced in the process of influence. So the first right from the Janusz Korczak's individual rights of the child draws attention to the context and environmental conditions affecting the child's development and functioning in place and space in so-called everyday world. So the child's rights to conditions conducive to growth and development. The second refers the relationships, communication, and cooperative conditions that enable the child to interact freely, so unforced the child's rights to know freely. Korczak points out the importance of preparatory work based on the child's process of cognition and understanding. Why? Because of the dissimilarity of the child's mind and feelings and the difficulty of the adult communicating with the child. In our case, when preparing for research, the absence of this right can result in, and I quote Korczak now, the brutality of adults in adapting the child to themselves, judgment of children's faults by adults, and the impossibility of communication in which, for example, adult faults will be articulated in the light of the child's concepts. The third right is the child's right to work on themselves. Korczak points to the need for the adult to understand that the child can struggle with his or her their own faults, downs and ups. He points here to the need to be authentic and reflective and empathic. These are extremely important issues as they can go unnoticed, ignored, and sometimes infantilized by adults. Then, as Korczak pointed out, in those absence of a reaction and in a relationship, the child may treat the transgression as the beginning of other transgressions. The next one, number 4, the child's right to full citizenship in their own world. Here, Korczak draws attention to the multidimensional devaluation the child's social competences, linked to the symbolic violence, adult attitudes, and stereotypes. Here, Korczak proposed that adults think about their promises to children, for adults to consider what can destroy trust in cooperation and to draw attention to the fact that this right is linked to the child's ability to be responsible for others. Korczak also subjects adults to an analysis of injustice as a practice that creeps into joint activities when there is a lot of ambiguity, misinformation, and lack of trust. In number 5, the rights of the child to recognize his, her, their inexperience and weaknesses. Korczak tried to adapt the child's work to his, her, their mind, level of development, and strength, remembering that there is a plurality of childhoods, not just one childhood. This means not forcing the child to act, be active, to engage in something by force. This is of one common dilemmas in research. Time is running out. There are deadlines and everything happens very slowly when we work with children. This is just quotation from the fieldwork. The child's rights to joy and leisure. This is the right number 6. Korczak emphasizes the importance of the work-leisure balance as this triggers children's optimism. Lack of balance and fatigue, which also appears in the evaluation of researchers, can result in the child not taking his or her own commitments seriously and failing to keep these commitments. So Korczak also drew attention here to the relationship to the present, the past, and the future. That is to say, the temporal perspective and its influence on the everyday life of the child and the adult. This is also evident, for example, in the research with children with experience of war, being both where there is war, where they remain family still alive, and here in a new place, hence the child's sense of being nowhere. We have such results from research with children from a community in Poland, and they answers, we are actually nowhere. And last one, the child's rights to a democratized upbringing. It is the last right that I want to draw attention to. I'm analyzing it in the context of the child's rights to democratization of the collaborative research process. To what extent is the research process with children democratic? Korczak postulates that the adult is an advocate for the rights of the child, which in research with children is reflected in the practices of consulting, advising, listening, taking into account and taking responsibility by the adult who invites children into research for the democratization of this process. So based on the individual rights of child by Korczak, I wanted to point out how useful these rights can be with adults prepare to research in the search for a child-centered approach in research with children. And this matrix indicates how much we adults can change the approaches of adult researchers if we reflexively analyze and also confront our ideas about children with children. And just to finalize, because the time is over, as I say, let me focus on my conclusions, because of course we need ethical issues. They are very important, but ethical principles are not enough concerning adultistic practices and our paths how to try to find child-centered approach in such sensitive research. And there must be always critical self-reflection on power inequality concerning preparation to such acts of research, and research with children expanding knowledge and should contribute to change. And we should also pay attention to strengthening children's social position with children-centered approach via and in research. So I will just finish with a question, because when I started analyze Korczak matrix, and which is quite new one, this is quite new document, then I was trying to looking on preparation of the research to research and how we can navigate our paths just to feel much more comfortable concerning especially such adultistic practices. And this is my conclusion. So there is no children's participation in research through a child-centered approach without changing the paradigm on how this research is designed and carried out by adults. So the question I'm decided to put on the slide as the final question, how to do it in order to avoid the differentiated dimensions of adultism in research with children. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ursula, thank you very much for your very, very interesting presentation. It was a very good introduction in this webinar. So I suggest just to continue with the second presentation from Deirdre Horgan. The title of the presentation is Experiences of Co-Creation, a participatory and inclusive method with children and young people's advisory groups. So Deirdre, the floor is yours. We are really looking forward to hear your presentation.
Thank you, Matejka. I'm just wondering, can you see my screen?
Yes, yes, we can see it.
Perfect. Well, thanks for the invitation to speak today. And I'm going to, I suppose really a lot of what I'm going to say dovetails with what Ursula has been talking about in relation to some of the challenges around participatory research with children, and those power inequalities that are, you know, structurally present in everything in all our engagements with children. And I'm going to speak specifically about a research project that we've been involved with here in UCC over the past 5 years. It's a Horizon project in which we tried to engage in participatory research with children in as co-creative a way as possible, encountered many challenges along the way. So I'll speak a little bit to that. So just briefly, I'll begin by saying a little bit about participatory research with children, provide a brief overview of the Immerse project itself, And I want to speak specifically about our research methods engaging our Children and Young People's Advisory Group on the project. And then finish by mentioning some of the immerse outputs that were co-created with children and young people. So to begin with, I'm sure everybody is familiar with this, but our understanding of child participation very often references Article 12 of the UNCRC, which talks about assuring children who are capable of forming their own views the right to express those views freely in all matters affecting the child. And we all know
Deirdre,
yes?
Deirdre, I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but the slides are not changing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, sorry.
Is this not moving forward for you? No?
No, it's not moving forward.
Okay. Right.
Now we are on the page, what is child participation? Yeah, now it's okay.
Okay. So, and you're seeing it as a full screen, are you?
No, it's a full screen.
Okay. I'll try and go back to full screen and...
Yes, maybe it's better.
Okay. So we know that these rights enshrined within the UNCRC are quite conditional on children's age and maturity. But the UN Committee on the Rights of the Child have since provided commentaries where they clarify that, you know, these rights are assured to all children, pre-verbal, non-verbal children, and it is the responsibility of adults to facilitate children in expressing their views, regardless of their position, their age, their maturity. And the Committee on the Rights of the Child has clarified the term participation as used in the UNCRC, and they refer to it as ongoing processes, which include information sharing and dialogue between children and adults. And I think that's one of the learnings we took from the Immerse project, is that building relationships is central to working in a participatory way with children in any capacity, whether it's research or policy development or any kind of work with children. So it's an ongoing kind of relational process built on mutual respect and, you know, taking children's views into account and trying to ensure that in taking those views into account, that those views have some impact and have, that children can see that their contribution has impact. I hope it's moving forward now, Matejka. Can you see the next slide?
No, it's not moving again. Sorry.
Okay.
Perhaps you have to start the slideshow.
Yes, yeah, I've done that.
Because yeah, the up, yeah, from the beginning, and now it should be the full screen. Yes. No.
Is it moving on for you now?
No, if you click from the beginning again.
Yeah.
No. What was that? It's not
moving on.
It doesn't show full screen. We see your PowerPoint with slides on the side.
Okay.
But maybe if you just move manually.
Yeah, we can do it manually. Yeah. Now we are on the slide 2. Now we are on slide 4. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. So I'll just keep going with this because I'm not sure what's happening with the slideshow.
Perfect.
Yeah. Just referencing Ursula's presentation earlier, she also mentioned Laura Lundy's model of participation, and that's something that has very much informed our project. Laura Lundy is based in Queen's University, Belfast in Northern Ireland, and her model has been very influential in our national participation strategies with children here in Ireland. And we've worked closely with Laura Lundy on a number of projects. And so this model really works well in our policy work and our research work with children and young people we've found over the years. And it's based on an understanding of the key elements of participation within the UNCRC, and that there are 4 key elements required to facilitate such participation: space, voice, audience, and influence. So I will speak a little bit to those as we go through. But I wanted to say something more generally about participatory research with children. And I suppose just more generally, there's been an increasing recognition of the value and as such an expansion of child participatory research using very creative research methods over the last 2 decades. So Christensen and James, Kellett and others have written extensively about this. So we see efforts to engage in more child-centered and more participatory research where there are efforts to research with children. And Winstone et al. Have talked about this and said, you know, it's based on a need to understand children and how they experience the world, that's been central to the development of these creative, innovative, participatory research methods. So the idea of children as experts in their own lives and creating methods to enable people to speak openly about their lives in safe and unthreatening contexts. And so that refers back to Lundy's idea of space, an appropriate and safe and comfortable space for children to talk about their lives and issues that impact them. But Gallagher, I think, makes a really important point that almost as important as the methods that we implement are the social relations involved in co-producing knowledge with children and young people. And that is a real characteristic of participatory research, the relational and social aspect. So there are huge responsibilities on adults engaging with children to, you know, not just parachute in and out of children's lives to conduct pieces of research, but that truly participatory research requires that relationship building and a more kind of longitudinal approach. And I've written myself previously about the challenges and the complexities of child participatory research. You know, it is a very complex, fluid and multi-layered process. And I'll speak to a little bit about that in relation to the Immerse project. And I think also people have spoken about the fact that there are particularly marginalized groups of children in the areas of research, pre-verbal, non-verbal children, children with additional needs, and migrant children, as Simon has written about, who are often researched about, but very, very seldom involved directly in the research themselves or co-producing, co-creating the research about themselves and their lives. I'll skip this slide because I'll come back to some of these points in a minute, just to give some context on the Immerse project. This is a project looking at the socio-educational integration of migrant children across Europe. And I suppose as a context, we know that, for example, in 2022, there were 43 million children forcibly displaced. Many of children are born as refugees annually. And we know that 40% of Ukrainian refugees are children. And those are UNESCO figures from 2023. Within that large kind of aspect of mobility for children, we know that schools are critically important sites of structural integration for migrant children and their families. So it's been well researched at this stage that schools offer more than just sites of education and places where children can build transferable skills and capital, but also they're important contexts for children's social inclusion, for the development of their peer groups, their friendship groups, for new cultural and language acquisition. And so that really underpins the importance of examining how we can promote children's integration through schools and local communities. So this is just a quick overview of the Immerse project and the partners involved. There were 3 universities and 3 NGOs and a number of public administration partners and technical companies involved in the research project, which spanned 6 European countries over a period of 5 years. So it's just recently been completed. Ireland was one of the countries, and I'll mention some of the others in a while. The main project phases, there were 4 key phases. The first was developing a dashboard of indicators. So we've developed 30 indicators around the inclusion of migrant and refugee children. Phase 2 was the development of a digital platform and Immerse Hub, which is a really rich repository of data around children. It compiles all of the research that has been conducted as part of Immerse, and there's an interactive database there where you can seek out lots of information and correlations between different aspects of migrant children's lives and our key findings. Phase 3 was the data collection work package. And as part of that, we surveyed 24,000 children across Europe. 60% of them are migrant children or have a migrant or refugee background. And then we also conducted case studies of particularly marginalised migrant children, those in refugee reception centres and unaccompanied minors, etc. And then the final phase was developing recommendations and trying to impact policy in the key national sites around refugee and migrant children, and identifying best practice in the area of integration of migrant children. So that's just a quick snapshot of the work that was undertaken in Immerse. And there were 6 countries: Belgium, Greece, Germany, Ireland, Italy, Spain. We engaged with over 400 sites, school sites. There were 4 participant groups: younger children, older children, parents, school principals and teachers. As I mentioned, there were a total of 24,000 children surveyed. About 14,000 of those were migrant children. As part of the research, we established a Children and Young Persons Advisory Group, and amazingly, they stayed with us through the longevity of the project. And because of COVID, we moved online. The project was extended by a year. So all of our Children and Young People's Advisory Group members stayed on that project group for the 5-year duration. So there were 18 migrant and refugee children who were all resident in Ireland. And I think it's important to note the purpose of such an advisory group. They're not research subjects, but they're informants and advisors and co-researchers on the project. So as Lundy and McAvoy have written about children's advisory groups, they're an expert group that reflect on the experiences of children in general, and they represent their peers in this process. So I'll speak a little bit about some of the work that we did with this Children and Young People's Advisory Group. So they were involved in all stages of the research, and I think that's quite unusual actually. Very often children's advisory groups are brought in at later stages of research, and maybe to pilot some of the materials or help disseminate some of the materials. With the Immerse Children and Young People's Advisory Group, they very much co-created the research with us. They helped to develop the research instruments, they tested them, they piloted them, they were involved in the data collection, they were involved in data analysis, and they're currently disseminating the materials with us. So that is challenging work. It requires acknowledging children's lives. There are very practical and time constraints related to children's involvement, and children's desired commitments as well. We need to be very flexible in working with children in advisory groups with research. They have very busy lives, they're involved in school, they have extracurricular activities, and so we have to work with their schedule, and that's what we've learned hugely through this process. Really important that we create child-friendly spaces and regular meetings. It involves a lot of capacity building. We had to work with our advisory group to familiarise them with what social research is. We had to train them around survey development, what a policy submission looks like, and help them with the writing of policy submissions. We had to do capacity building around data analysis, methodologies, and helping them and supporting them to communicate and disseminate the findings of the research. I think there were a lot of benefits for the group in terms of familiarity. All of our meetings were on university campus when they weren't online because of COVID. They got to know university staff and researchers. It helped to build their social capital and their networks. And so, there were a lot of, and the young people themselves talked a lot about the benefits of being involved in the research with us. The role of the Children and Young People's Advisory Group in Immerse was multifaceted. So they advised and informed the whole research process. They helped us develop, validate and pilot the research materials. They were involved in data analysis, and as I say, they're also now involved in disseminating the results. I'll just give 1 or 2 examples of their involvement. in the early stages, when we were developing the large-scale survey, which was going to be administered across hundreds of schools in the 6 European member state countries, the children and young people in the advisory group helped us to develop that questionnaire. We used the CARA method to refine and validate and pilot the questionnaires with the young people. And in particular, they were really instrumental in ensuring that COVID and the impact of COVID on migrant children was dealt with in the survey. And it meant reconfiguring the survey when it was almost ready to be sent out to schools as COVID hit, but it was a really, really important input from the Children and Young People's Advisory Group that we did that. And looking back, we're so thankful that, you know, that they pushed for that to be included within the survey, because we now have really rich insights from children and young people who are with migrant backgrounds all across Europe on their experiences of COVID, the interruptions in their schooling, what digital learning was like for them, and the challenges around digital learning for many migrant children. The advisory group were also involved in data analysis workshops, and I won't read all the text, but just here are a couple of photos and images. So there's a lot of capacity building around that, explanation of how we analyze data, how we cluster variables, how we measure variables, relationships and connections between cases. And then the children and young people on our advisory group looked at some of the survey data and looked at relationships that existed. They were particularly interested in us running the data analysis on what are the relationships between gender, age, and migrant background for all of the key outcomes. And so it was really important kind of clustering that they were involved in, and brought about some important insights as well into the findings. I'm just going to show you some of the child-friendly resources that were co-created with the children and young people. So we have an animated video, which the children and young people in our advisory group worked with us on. Right throughout the project, they were involved through social media campaigns. They wrote blogs for the website. There was a campaign for World Children's Day that they were very heavily involved in. They took over the Instagram account, the Immerse Instagram account, for periods during the project. They've been involved in the co-writing of the Children and Young People's report at the end of the Immerse project. And really proud to say that they co-authored the book chapter in the Oxford Handbook of Research Methodologies. We felt it was really important because they've been so centrally involved in so many aspects of the research that they be named as co-authors in that chapter as well. Also, very importantly, they've been involved in policy work, and they made a submission to the Irish government when it was producing the Irish National Plan Against Racism last year in 2023. So you can see their involvement in dissemination has been really multifaceted, and they were involved as well in the European Commission final project event. So just some comments from our Children and Young People's Advisory Group. We asked them, we did a participatory focus group with them on their experiences of being involved in the Immerse project. And some of the comments were, I like getting to participate in different projects that actually go beyond, you know, and has impact on other people with similar backgrounds. And another young person said, it's good to have a young person's insight when you're talking about working with young people and asking them questions. So there we see that kind of notion of, you know, they have a particular insight into the lives and experiences of migrant children of their age. And so it's important that they inform the process of the research, looking at that topic. And then finally, I suppose just some broad-ranging conclusions and our findings as a research team. And I worked here with Jackie O'Riordan and Shirley Martin in this project. But projects like Immerse can contribute to policy very much grounded in children's lives and realities. And in many ways, when we do that, when we go about research in that way, we produce much more responsive policy services and research. There's lots of challenges, as we experienced, in engaging in participatory research like this in a over a long time frame. There are lots of costs involved, the length and the scale of the project. childhood transitions. So young people who were involved at the beginning of the project aged out. So they were now, 20, for example, when the project finished. They were 15 when it began. So there's a lot of logistics and kind of practical considerations involved in that. Communication can be very challenging, and finding the best way to communicate, and also then scheduling of meetings with young people and our expectations of them. So we really do feel that Frank's idea of pockets of participation is very helpful in this regard, that we don't have overly high expectations of children and youth advisory groups. There are times when they will be less able to contribute, and that's why having a slightly larger advisory group can be helpful. So you can have subgroups working on work packages, and that not everybody has to be involved in every particular work package. And so there's flexibility and choice built in for the young people. And then finally, children's research advisory groups can, we feel, offer us a way to conduct rights-informed research that's meaningful for children. And it's particularly important for enabling marginalised voices, such as those of migrant children. So thank you very much for your time today. Happy to take any questions later.
Yeah, thank you very much for your presentation. We will just continue with the third lecture today, with the title, Growing Up in a Survey, a Child-Centered Approach to Longitudinal Data Collection. Please, Harit Khan, the floor is yours.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you.
Okay, give me 1 second. I'll just share the slide.
Yes, yes, take your time. We can see your presentation, but with the slides on the left, it's not the full page. Yes, now it is. Perfect.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Matilda and Barbara and her colleague and other team for organizing such a wonderful webinar and asking me to present in this session. Before I start, I would like to mention that the material I am going to present today actually is taken from a chapter from a book jointly edited by Zorana, Matilda, and Barbara. And the chapter is written jointly with my colleague, Professor Gary Pollock. So today, I am going to talk about research around migrant children, and my presentation will basically make a case for conducting a longitudinal, pan-European longitudinal survey, gathering data from, particularly from migrant children. So let me first tell you a bit about the background of this research. So the survey has become a popular method for children, for research with children and young people in the past few decades. And the large-scale surveys gathering primary data from children and young people are commonly used in developing, monitoring, and mapping policies for children. However, there has been a major paradigm shift in the approaches taken in designing and implementing surveys for research with children. We have witnessed the growth of a child-centered approach in quantitative surveys, in which children's voices and points of view play a crucial role in defining the research agenda and deciding suitable modes for data collection in recent years. This was influenced mainly by the growing recognition of children's and young people's rights to have a good childhood and a good future life chances in the policy agenda, and the injunction from the new sociology of childhood to consult with children, young people as active agents in conducting research with them. So in today's presentation, the focus will basically be on the child-centered approach to conducting surveys among children, young people in general, and migrant children in Europe in particular. And the main focus is to talk about the challenges in conducting a pan-European longitudinal survey to understand migrant children's experiences. So I have organized the session into several parts. So first, I will describe the characteristics of a child-centered approach to research with children. Then I'll critically review well-being surveys among children in the context of a child-centered approach and identifies the knowledge gap. And then I'll review the existing longitudinal surveys and talk about the suitability of those research in capturing migrant children's experiences. And finally, discuss the potential challenges linked to capturing migrant children experiences in a longitudinal survey. So first of all, I would like to spend a bit of time explaining what a child-centered approach to research actually means. So there are different kinds of definitions available in the literature. But if we look at Brookhoff and Cook's study, we notice that they emphasized on two essential elements of child-centered research. First one is about capturing children's voices, and second one about children's participation. In the context of research, these two elements are interlinked, as giving voices to children is determined ultimately by the governing approach undertaken in this research. If we look at in the literature, we find that there are several models being used around children's participation in research. So I'm going to talk about two types of models. The first one is from Shaw and other researchers, where they actually talked about 4 models on participation. First one, children and young people as sources of data. Second one, children and young peoples are consulted about the research. Third one, where children and young people are collaborators in the study. And the final is where children and young people have ownership of the research. So there is a hierarchy among the models in terms of the degree of capturing the voices of children and young people, from the lowest level in model 1 and the highest level in model 4. We also see another popular models of participation, which is called the ladder of participation, proposed by Hart in 1992. And in that model, we see 8 steps: manipulated, decorated, tokenized, assigned but informed, consulted and informed, adult-initiated, shared decisions with children, child-initiated and directed, and finally, child-initiated, shared decisions with adults. Hart labeled steps 1 to 3 as non-participatory and 4 to 8 as participatory with varying degrees, 4 as being the least participatory and 8 being the highest participatory. So in our research, we define child-centered surveys are those in which children and young people are regarded as collaborators and decisions are taken jointly with them by adult researchers in different stages of the survey, from the preparation of a project information leaflet suitable for children, or designing the survey of data collection tools, to co-producing a project report or policy messages. Now, I would like to briefly highlight what progress has been made in in the surveys we see in the literature. So we have grouped those surveys into three categories. First one is child indicator based research. Basically, these were initially developed focusing on measurement and trends in child well-being, primarily using survival indicators such as mortality, disease, social problems affecting children like literacy, illiteracy, school failure, etc. These indicator-based measures are useful to understand children's lives in general, but they lack a child-centered approach as they tend to ignore the potential attributes and strength of children. Children do not have any input in the research process, and therefore it is often regarded as adult-centered research. Second strand we see is called self-report surveys, where children are actually asked to assess their own lives. So while this strand gathers data directly from children, they do not qualify to be as child-centered surveys. This is because the opportunity for children to shape the research through their participation is very limited. The applied concepts and domains of well-being originate from study of adult well-being and are not directly transferable to the measurement of young people, of children and young people. And the third strand we see called child-centered well-being studies. This is still in the early phase. They have focused on developing concepts and framework that incorporates children's perspectives and voices at various stages of the research process. And having the unique position of research with and by children, this third strand reflects a major paradigm shift in child well-being surveys. Children play a vital role in this strand by providing valuable inputs, and this can range from setting up a research agenda and feedback on survey design and survey instruments, acting as advisors, to co-producing reports. So although the third strand captures children's voices better by adopting flexible participatory models and therefore is regarded as child-centered, a major limitation of these surveys is their inefficiency in detecting change at individual level, hindering knowledge gains about how an individual transition to different statuses is linked to their well-being. Since childhood is not static but dynamic, a holistic developmental view is required that considers both changes in different stages of children's development and transition. And this explains why there is a growing support for a pan-European longitudinal survey using a children and young people-centered approach. Now, I'm going to talk about the need for a child-centered longitudinal survey, especially accommodating migrant children. So international migration, in particular, where children and young people are transiting through or settling in Europe, has become a major issue of policy interest. This has led to significant international research and action-oriented projects which seek to better understand how policies can be developed based on robust evidence which can help to improve their lives. Curtis and colleagues provided a systematic review of literature of migrant children in Europe, and out of 46 studies that they reviewed, the majority generated self-reports, quantitative data with children, were basically cross-sectional analytic studies. They identified a paucity of research concerning migrant children's perspectives and emphasized the need for a more child-focused research assessing migrant children's needs and experiences. So Curtis' review also revealed a lack of research among migrant children using a longitudinal design. The scientific and policy interest of this method is derived from an appreciation that life is not static and the measures need to be sensitive to varying experiences over the life course. Although this applies to other children as well, migrant children experience the transition into and out of different contexts throughout their lives more uniquely. While cross-sectional survey among migrant children takes a snapshot of life at a moment in time, it is not as informative in being able to contribute to how the past of migrant children has informed the present and future. For example, a cross-sectional survey can tell us which migrant families are in poverty at a specific point in time, but it cannot help us understand the dynamics of migrant families who move into and out of poverty. Given that social policies aim to make improvements in society, these dynamic processes are important in being able to understand more about the factors that are associated with entering and exiting different statuses. Longitudinal data is best able to represent the complexities of people's lives and to articulate experiences which are unique to individuals. Through analysis of such data, better policy responses can be derived, which can be fine-tuned to such experiences. So designing a series of cohort survey of migrant children can have additional benefits because this kind of design allows one to compare the detailed experiences of one cohort with the subsequent ones. The value of repeated cohort studies of migrant children lies in their ability not only to examine individual trajectories through calendar time, but also to see how different generations experience early years, education, the transition from school to work, and family formation. The extent to which existing representative surveys contain data that can help understand migrant experiences may, however, be limited, as migration is one of a range of topics to be included, and there is no guarantee that any of these surveys would contain such data. Given the international nature of migration, there is arguably a need for there to be a comparable data in different countries to examine how migrants fare in different jurisdictions. This aspect will be now discussed a bit more, firstly by highlighting what could be some potential challenges if we actually go for such kind of pan-European longitudinal survey. So first of all, I would like to talk about sampling and sample size related issues. So unlike cross-sectional surveys, longitudinal surveys explicitly recognize that populations are dynamic. Some method of defining a fixed population upon which to base a design is usually needed. But in research with migrant children, the definition of the population gets more complicated by the fact that there are different forms of migration, forced and voluntary. Furthermore, the host countries classify migrant children in different ways, which might also change over time. These issues can create further complexities, especially in a study that aims to measure migrant children's experiences using a comparative design structure. When surveying migrant children to study life experience, it is necessary to plan for the eventual sample size required for longitudinal analysis by considering not only population births and deaths that are reflected in the sample, but also taking into account the expected attrition during the life of the survey. The key issue is to have adequate number of observations on each event for persons in the migrant children population subgroups of interest. And it is possible to estimate minimum sample size that would be required to detect a statistically significant association, difference, or change The calculation can be done based on objectives and key variables in the study with migrant children. There might be also a tendency for migrant children to refuse the interview, to be interviewed if there is a suspicion as to the purpose of the survey, particularly where migrants have come from repressive regimes with autocratic governments supported by a strong security apparatus. These suspicions among them might also come from their experience of being repressed and restricted by the border regime in the destination country. The lack of identification and tendency to refuse to be interviewed threatened the representativity of a sample and therefore its ability to be a true account of a migrant children. So this issue also needs to be taken into account. And for this purpose, weighting could be a mechanism to address some of the issues. Now, I'd like to talk a bit about the challenges associated with designing a child-centered survey questionnaire with children. Capturing the voices of migrant children in designing a child-centered survey questionnaire can also be challenging. There is a lack of reliable and valid survey questionnaires for researching this marginalized group, and existing child-centered survey instruments may not be fully suitable for them. Therefore, it is advisable to start designing a questionnaire by getting migrant children involved in the design stage of the survey. For this purpose, an advisory panel of migrant children can advise on the topics that can be included in the survey or the question format that would work for this specific group of children, and how the question should be asked so that the children will understand them. In a comparative longitudinal survey that involves migrant children, designing question can also become a challenging aspect because questions may be affected by intercultural differences linked to migrant children, from response scale design to a layout and visual aids to wording, ambiguity, and social desirability. Differences across culture exist in response to the same response scale and also stimuli. So pre-testing questions is considered to be an important option for the researchers to design a child-centered survey in general, identify those cultural issues, and undertake remedial measures from them. Recent advances in cognitive pre-tests involving web probing ensure that the internal validity of questions is secured alongside translation procedures. So usually the best practice is achieved where we have a cross-sectional design with expert representatives from a heterogeneous set of countries. Having an advisory panel of migrant children is usually useful to capture migrant children's perspectives on those aspects. And such panel is also an essential aspect of child-centered approach in designing surveys. Now, I would like to talk very briefly about few challenges linked to modes, principles, and challenges of child-centered data collection. So although several modes, for example, face-to-face surveys, telephone interviews, video interviews, paper version questionnaire, online questions are available for collecting online survey data from children and young people, researchers need to assess their suitability for migrant children before using them in a particular survey. In this regard, pilot testing of questionnaire, cognitive testing, and more time and resources for building trust with migrant children is crucial. In cross-national longitudinal survey involving migrant children, Choices of mood depend on country-specific factors, such as geographical size, population density, internet coverage, as well as the needs of the migrant children. For example, their experience of participating in survey in the past, competency in language spoken in the host country, etc. Migrant children do not form a homogeneous group. This group can have additional layers of vulnerability, for example, disability, higher risk of being in poverty, early school dropout, and acculturation challenges. Working with migrant children and young people who have special needs and vulnerability will be challenging for comparative longitudinal research. This is because the research team will have to consider the extra resources required to consult with practitioners and gatekeepers who know the needs and vulnerability of those migrant children and take appropriate support strategies needed to overcome the barriers to their participation in the survey. So now I would like to sum up the presentation by highlighting a couple of points. So the purpose of this presentation was to critically examine the progress that has been made in surveying children with special reference to migrant children and the challenges associated with designing a child-centered comparative longitudinal survey for this vulnerable group that is often regarded as difficult to reach. Although there is a gradual progress in surveys measuring children's well-being using a child-centered methodology for a better informing policies for migrant and non-migrant children, there is a greater need for a comparative longitudinal survey in Europe, where the number of migrant children has increased in recent years. Because of the international nature of migration, there is a need for there to be a comparable data in different countries to examine how migrants fare in different jurisdictions. It is argued here that an international approach seeking to harmonize questionnaire content across countries would be a way of broaching this issue. Of course, there are several challenges incorporating migrant children in traditional comparative longitudinal survey. In this regard, defining the migrant children population could be difficult because of different types of migration experienced by children. Drawing a representative sample of migrant children could be difficult for not having a complete set of migrant children in different European countries. Traditional modes of data collection, access issues, ethical approval, and barriers to language spoken by the host country are some of the other challenges that require special attention for studying this vulnerable group of children. Having an advisory panel of migrant children on board throughout the lifespan of the survey is essential for addressing some of those challenges. In this kind of child-centered survey, these advisors are regarded as key stakeholders. They guide the research team by providing insights into the suitability of research components, for example, information leaflets, questionnaire language, contents, and design in capturing the lived experiences of migrant children. This approach is innovative as it enables young migrants to contribute to the development of theory, practice, and policy, an area where their voices often go unheard. This social justice-based approach also promotes the agency of migrant children whose views are often otherwise not considered as valuable as adults. So that's it. Thank you so much. And I'll be happy to answer if you have any query at some stage of the presentation. Thank you again.
Thank you very much for this last presentation. So thank you again to all three of you. I believe that the presentations expose a lot of important aspects of child-centered approach, child-centered research, from the theoretical point of view, but also the experiences from the empirical research.
For more information, visit www.coordinate-network.eu.